And so thanks for coming this morning. We were gonna just do kind of office hours and like another week of no content this week, but then I attended this webinar this weekend and there was so much great stuff on it. And I felt like the longer I waited to share it, the less kind of an impact it might make. And the sooner I shared it, the better I felt about it. So this is 100% not my content. It's based on a webinar I attended, and actually I watched it twice in 2 different forums, and it was so good I just sat through the whole thing 2 times. And it's by this couple named Cornelius and Cass Miner, and some of you might know them just from social media. They're if you don't follow them on either Instagram or Twitter, they're great people to follow. They're a couple, they live in Brooklyn, they have 2 young kids and they're educators, and their work is just really amazing. So I reached out to them and said, can I kind of like rework your workshop for my own people? And they were like, by all means, please just give us credit. So here's their credit, and I'll refer to them a lot. And I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen with you. And oops. That's not the one. There it is. So it's kind of, you know, again, this is inspired by Cass and Cornelius Miner, and I'll email out. I don't really feel like dealing with like the chat and all that stuff this morning. So if you don't mind, I'm just gonna kind of share and let you watch, and then I'll email out the slides to you later for you to have your own copy of them if you want to refer back to them. And here's all their contact info, and they have a lot of great stuff. Cornelius has actually written this book. I haven't read it yet, but I just got it. It's called We Got This, and it's Equity, Access, and the Quest to Be Who Our Students Need Us to Be. So I'm really excited, and after I read it, if anyone wants to borrow it and share a copy, I'd be happy to do that. So basically, to start, I wanted to just kind of acknowledge where we are right now. We obviously are in a place where our jobs literally changed overnight. We have a lot of professional uncertainty. We're doing work in a way that we never dreamed or imagined that we would need to do. And we're kicking ass and doing it, right? And so, but there's a lot of uncertainty. We're doing something that's never, ever been done before. And we need to acknowledge that our work isn't going to be perfect. It's not going to be predictable. The more flexibility that we have with ourselves and with each other and with our students and our families, the better that this is all going to go. And that if we haven't already, which I would probably guess that 100% of us have already experienced some discomfort, whether that's around the technology or the lack of human contact or the new tools that we're being asked to use or the just complete change in the way that we're doing our jobs. That discomfort is something that, you know, I think is really important to recognize and to acknowledge. And then the other thing I think that's a really big part of what Cass and Cornelius focus on is what this pandemic has made really clear to us in education. And that's, you know, just acknowledging that there are profound inequities in schooling, right? They existed before we moved home, and they were just kind of magnified once we got here. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And that we just have to really consciously work to adapt for these inequities, right? We're constantly thinking about access for our students, about flexibility in our procedures. And so we're gonna talk about that some more today as well. And that there's really no one best way forward. And it's really interesting. I was thinking about the workshop we did, I guess it was during the optional week in August, and when we did a discussion around work around anti-racist teaching, and there were a lot of people that put in their feedback that they wanted a curriculum, right? They wanted a scope and sequence, K to 12, and they wanted, you know, this curriculum that we could work through as a district. And, you know, Marie and I had kind of a long talk about that, afterward. And for a lot of this work, there is no one curriculum. There's no binder, right? There's no binder in how this is done. We're kind of what they say, like building the plane as we fly it, right? And so there isn't a binder or a curriculum in how to do this, right? But they're, according to Cass and Cornelius, these essential components of this work moving forward. So to them, the essential components are self-work, really thinking about who you are and what you're bringing to the table. That has a lot to do, if you were at the workshop on last Monday around identity work and thinking about who you are and what your story is and the history, because you're going to be teaching in a way that reflects that identity, no matter who you are, right? And so continuing to evaluate that and think about that is really important. Clearly, systemic awareness. We've been talking a lot about the systems that we're working in and how they are limiting, more so to certain students than others, and just our place within that system as we're moving forward as educators. Active change making, noticing what you think does not work and doing your part to help change it. And then powerful teaching. And to me, powerful teaching is not as much about the content as it is about the connections to our students. And that's kind of going to be the focus of today. So again, I'm going to go just kind of quickly. I want to get you off and doing the rest of your Wednesday work. I know you want to be meeting with each other, and lots of you have back to school night tonight, and I want to be really aware of all that is going on. So it's a lot, but it's just also, today is meant to just kind of like plant this seed that's just kind of at the back of your mind moving forward. It's not a new tool to use. It's not a new requirement. It's not a new, like, oh my God, I have to throw everything away and start from scratch. It's a framework to kind of be looking at being back in school with our students. And my hope is that always framing your thinking around your teaching based on this type of work actually relieves some of the pressure, because it's going to give you the flexibility to let some things go and to really think about what's essential and what's most valuable. And to me personally, that's not the standards. It's not getting through all the content. It's really about meeting our students where they're at and being in that moment with them. So this was a quote by him: "We're allowed to be angry, sad, unsure, overwhelmed." And I'm sure you can relate to all of those words. And that we don't have to get used to this, but that we can forge a reality that's good for us and good for our kids as we move forward. I haven't cried yet. It's so good. I'm so glad. Shaky voice, but no tears yet. So I really loved this idea of thinking about a new paradigm, because I think that a lot of the things that we're noticing about what we need to do to adapt to remote teaching is actually what we need to do to adapt to better teaching in a system that is not great for all students, right? It's very limited, it's very controlled, it's got this one scope, and so even when we're back face to face in the classroom with our students, I think that this isn't just a new paradigm for remote teaching, it's really a new paradigm for teaching, right? It's thinking about, I know Marie's been referring to Bettina Love's book, Abolitionist Teaching, We Want to Do More Than Survive. So to me, this is like a whole shift in what education can look like moving forward. Not that we haven't been doing a lot of this already. We're caring, we're connected, we're engaged teachers, but just thinking again about that that structure that we're limited by, and thinking about how some shifts can happen around that. So the first component that they talk about always is human-centered care. And so always constantly be thinking about the connection to our students. And that means, knowing who they are, doing that identity work, not only with ourselves, but doing it with them, understanding what their stories are and where they're coming from. And again, that is so essential right now when we're not teaching in our controlled environment of our classroom, but we're literally teaching in like up to 30 different homes, right? Like we're trying to make our classroom in 30 very different spaces, right? And make that work for students with 30 very different stories. And so just always approaching what we're doing from a place of care, and not from a place of must meet standards, must fit these very particular expectations, is a shift that I think is an important one. They talked a lot about really that there's a quote at the very end of this slideshow that's like, it's not our job to keep them busy, it's our job to keep them curious, and our job to keep them engaged. And that, you know, we're gonna talk a lot about how how we need to be giving our students multiple opportunities to practice the skills that we want them to have. And instead of focusing on a very particular standard, it's more skill-based than standards-based. And we'll kind of move into that a little bit, but giving our students multiple opportunities for practice. Embracing multiliteracies, and this means, you know, moving outside of just oral and print language, but thinking about art, thinking about video, thinking about music, thinking about giving kids the opportunity to show their learning and express themselves in all these different ways, right? And so bringing in things other than just print and oral spoken language, but to allow for these other multiliteracies as well. Embracing flexibility and innovation. And just one quick story that he told during his webinar, he was talking about the rules in the classroom and how he had these very specific rules for the classroom. And he has this rug, and he teaches in New York City. So there was one corner of the rug, you know, where all the kids would go and sit. And that corner was right by the bucket where kids put their wet clothes when it was snowing. So they'd put their like hats and scarves and boots and stuff right in this big bucket. And so the corner of the rug that was near that bucket would always be soggy. That was like the soggy corner. And so when he told kids to go sit at the rug, everybody avoided sitting in that soggy corner of the carpet. And he didn't even really realize it was happening, but the kids knew this was happening. And so when he was talking about structures and rules and routines in the classroom, one of the kids raised their hand and said, you know, Mr. Miner, it's not fair that the way you dismiss us to the rug disadvantages kids who move more slowly. Not everyone moves as quickly as others. And so it's always the same kids, those kids that move more slowly, that have to sit in the soggy corner of the rug. And he was like, whoa, like never even thought that a structure that he had in place was, you know, impacting a certain group of kids in that way. And so he was like, this flexibility and getting feedback from students and innovation and just always rethinking, like, God, I've had this structure in place forever and it's just the way I do things, and being able to kind of let go of some of those things and adapt when you realize that maybe it's not serving the purpose or it's causing harm for people that you didn't even realize. And then again, always just working through a lens of equity, justice, and anti-racism. So this kind of shift to this new paradigm. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. So these kind of components as you move through, I just wanted to, you know, again, plant the seed of always prioritizing connection and relationship over really potent, strong, you know, like driven content and academic material, and that is, you know, like 150% important now, but it's still 100% important when we're in the classroom. And I think we get so bogged down by standards and tests and assessments, and you know, I feel like we have the power to kind of push that, right? Like I'm thinking about my son who's a senior this year, and I opted him out. I'll just say it. I opted him out of SBAC for years because I just didn't. Well, and I know I'm recording this and I'm a district employee, but personally, I just didn't love it. And so I opted him out. And I know that those are our requirements, but I also feel like, you know, all of a sudden, here's my senior son who is now applying to college without having to take the SAT or the ACT. And all these universities are going more like, you know, interview and recommendation and activities based rather than test score based. And like, all it took was us not being able to put all our kids in a room together because of a health issue, that this whole structure has now changed. And that, you know, some of these schools are now saying they're never going to go back. They're not going to go back to using the SAT and ACT. And how powerful that is, that like, that happened overnight because of this pandemic, but it's also forcing us to question that structure in the first place, right? So I think that's an important thing to think about. And then again, that human care becomes ritualized when it continues to be an important routine in class. So not just like the first 2 weeks of school check-ins, but making it ritualized, having a Friday check-in, giving them that form to click off their emoji and let you know how they're doing, doing some sort of feedback form, and making that connection with them a more important routine in class, that connection piece. And then again, that identity piece, remembering that what we're bringing with us and who we are really matters. The way we're looking at things, and just always kind of keeping that at the back of our minds. And then be flexible again in understanding of multiliteracies, thinking beyond that print, writing, and oral verbal language. And then, on that previous slide, there are some links there. So when I email this out, if you're interested, there's some articles and videos and some links. There's a great example of a student interview that they use once a week with their students in different ways. It can either be through a written form or getting one-on-one with students, but so that's really great. And again, this slide, again, just touching on the fact that, you know, we're used to our community in a way being our little controlled environment in our classroom where we're controlling everything that happens, and just how different this is now that we're going into our students' homes and teaching inside their homes. And so keeping that in mind as well. And that just forces this kind of connection of community to what those families are, what their situations are, what they're going through, and what that looks like for each student. So they did this really nice kind of part on why do people learn new things. And so keeping in mind, and you'll notice, I'll just, like the punchline, I'll give away that the spoiler is that not one of these is to get good grades, to achieve on a certain test, but like the reasons why people learn new things, to allow greater freedom for themselves. It gives them more opportunity, right? And I just said that one, new opportunities. It's learning new things allows us to connect with other people. Learning new things provides a worthy challenge for us, and it helps me do good out in the world when I know more. And it allows me to maybe survive something that's threatening to me, right, by having knowledge and information. So again, when you're thinking about content and thinking about, you know, ways that you can frame it with this in mind, that these are some of the reasons why it's good for people to learn new things. And then this slide to me was super powerful, reflecting back on, and actually I redid all these slides, so theirs didn't look like mine, but they had the same content. But they were talking about who we're working with and our students. And again, it's very different when we're sitting in a classroom and we have our very controlled environment, and we can say, put your head up. You don't lay down on the floor in class, like sit up, sit in your chair. And, but we know that we have students that have very low energy at school and very high energy at school. And we're constantly managing those students that have lower energy and higher energy. And this is just expanded on when they're in their own homes, right? And they're in their own bedrooms and they're sitting at their kitchen table. And so keeping in mind that, you know, you're navigating this very different level of low energy versus high energy for the work, for school, for online school, for remote school, for sitting on Zoom, for you know, doing work without you right there to help them. Like there's students that are going to have low energy and high energy. And we're also dealing with students that have lots of time to be putting into school and students that have not enough time, right? Whether it's shared access with their siblings, whether it's a chaotic home life, whether it's, you know, being carted around because families have to be out working, like all these different things that we don't know about. And so when Cornelius was talking about his lesson planning, he was talking about kind of trying to think about his activities inside this kind of quadrant, right? And so what are you preparing that allows for a student with high energy but not enough time, right, to be successful with your work? And what are you thinking about in terms of allowing for a student with low energy but tons of time? What, you know, how can that student be successful? And so kind of imagining students, like just picturing, and you can probably even put names in this puzzle, in these puzzle pieces of students. Either you might not know them well enough yet this year to know where they fit in this kind of quadrant, but certainly students from the past you could think about and just think, what are you doing to provide opportunities for students, no matter where they sit in here, to be successful with what you're sharing with them? So that's another thing that was pretty powerful for me. Then he was talking about how he builds an experience for students. And I really liked the way he framed that, instead of like lesson planning or, you know, content delivery or whatever it is that we kind of tend to think about. It's really more about building your experiences for students. And so, so he really focuses on thinking about what is the learning outcome. What is it you want your students to know? What is that learning outcome? Is it counting to 10? Is it being able to come up with, and his example is being able to come up with topics for a personal narrative, right? So what is the learning outcome that you want your students to be able to do? And thinking of at least 3 different ways that students can demonstrate progress toward that outcome. So giving students some choice and not just being like, you're gonna show me you know that by doing X, right? But give it maybe, and again, because of that puzzle, right, of where students are at, maybe providing for some choice and some different ways, because ultimately what matters is that they met the learning outcome, right? And does it really have to be demonstrating in the way that we have specified that they learn that learning outcome, or is our are we able to be flexible and let go of the path to get there when we acknowledge that the thing that's the most important is the learning outcome itself? So having some flexibility. He also talked about what are a couple things I could demonstrate to them to help them understand that outcome. And he talked about both actions, showing them what are the steps you could physically do, but also habits of mind, talk them through your thinking, right? And so both of those being really important to demonstrating to students how to understand the outcome. What kinds of opportunities can you give students to practice whatever skill that is? And then how can you measure, reflect on the learning, and also measure progress toward that learning goal? And so this to me was a very powerful way of thinking about designing, you know, my activities, my experiences, my lessons for students. And here's his kind of, I thought this was really helpful too, his kind of lesson planning page, right? So his learning outcome up here is that that's what you want kids to be able to do. And he used the very Lucy Calkins example of kids will learn how to think about topics that they can write about independently very early on, you know, 4th grade part of units of study personal narrative, or 5th grade or 3rd grade. How can students demonstrate that they can create those topics? Well, they could explain how they get ideas. They could just have an idea. If they have an idea, they clearly have showed you that they know how to get ideas, right? They can act out parts of a story to show you that. They can illustrate parts of the story and draw pictures to show you what those ideas are. So lots of different, again, multi-literacies. What can you do to show them how to learn that skill. And then he listed some things here. He can show kids how to think about important people. And for those of you that have taught that units of study unit, you probably recognize some of these things, right? He can show kids how to think about important places. He can show kids how to think about big feelings. He can show kids how to think about turning points in their own lives. So he can model those by doing that himself and talking kids through it. And then what does he need to have ready? And so that's kind of your, like, what do I have to plan ahead of time? And again, I'll email this out if this is helpful to anyone in terms of thinking about it. Things that matter. Again, kind of just backing up, authentic connection among kids. And I know, that's a really hard one to be doing right now. And we've been talking about Flipgrid and breakout rooms and, trying to find ways that connect kids to each other in this time when they're isolated from each other. Our authentic connection to kids. And I know a lot of people spent the first week doing one-on-ones and getting to know their students in this very bizarre and different way. And how can we maintain that prioritizing that connection and that human care piece. Focusing on skill acquisitions more than content acquisition. So really, again, focusing on what is the learning outcome and the skill. And then that practice piece, giving them opportunities to practice what we want them to be able to do. So I was thinking last year, I'm so attached to, social studies curriculum. And last year teaching a 4-5 combo, I was trying to do these two really big pieces of history concurrently, Gold Rush for my 4th graders and, colonial times and Revolutionary War for my 5th graders and the Declaration and all that stuff. And I really had to kind of stop and think, right? And be like, all right, if 4th graders walk away not knowing what all my other 4th graders have walked away knowing about the gold rush, are they still going to be successful human beings in life? Can they still but what is it about the gold rush that I feel, or what parts of that unit do I think are the most important? And so when we're so limited in the amount of time we have with our students and having to kind of weed through our content, I think that this skill acquisition more than content can free us up a little bit to be like, all right, when they walk out the door in June, what do I feel really, really, really strongly that they're able to do moving forward? And it requires a lot of letting go and a lot of, for me, that anger and sadness and all that stuff comes in when I realize I have to let go of a lot of the things that I love doing with my students and that I want to be doing with my students. But how can I shift to make this authentic for them and engaging for them and meaningful for them and have them walk out the door, maybe not with what I imagine in my mind, but what I think is important moving forward. So reimagining engagement. So again, this whole piece around, I know there's been a lot of discussion about cameras on or cameras off, and it's really hard for us, again, to let go of that piece of control that we're used to having, looking at students right in front of us and knowing that they're listening to you and that they are engaged, right? And it looks so different in the classroom than it does right now. And so just thinking about, first of all, what might be some reasons that students are disengaged, whether that's what's going on in their home or that they're not connecting to what it is that you're teaching and sharing, or that they're embarrassed to be sharing in front of their friends, publicly on, whatever. But thinking about those reasons for disengagement, first of all, but then also really reimagining what does engagement look like? Does it have to mean every camera's on and everyone is quiet and people are not writing in the chat box and everyone is listening? And, can engagement be something different? Can it be something that's more like, tell me 2 things you learned while we were on Zoom today, right? And that then even if their camera's off, even if they had a separate tab open and they were playing Minecraft on a separate tab while you're teaching, if they were listening and able to take something in and able to share with you 2 things they picked up while you were on Zoom that morning, is that enough right now? And so I just maybe kind of, again, plant that seed of thinking about what engagement looks like and letting go a little bit and reconsidering how you want to ask for engagement from your students, because I don't think it's realistic. I think you're gonna just feel beaten down and frustrated and upset and start to develop these like ideas in your mind about your students who don't have their camera on, or who aren't, participating in the way that we're used to it being in our classrooms. And so considering these flexible options for engagement, and I'd be happy to, chat more about that, or if anyone is wants to brainstorm that more together, that really excites me to think about what are the tools that we have, and some of these ed tech tools and even non-ed tech tools that we could use to allow for some more flexible engagement for students. So again, there's that kind of quote, it's not our job to keep them busy, it's our job to keep them curious. And I know parents might disagree and want them kept busy, but just that one was very striking to me. So anyway, this, I wanted to, again, thank Cornelius and Cass for the amazing content that I kind of shifted for our own purposes today. And I also wanted to let you know that these slides look very fancy and pretty, and they're just from a site called Slides Carnival. So if you're getting tired of plain old Google slideshows and you want to jazz things up a little bit, you can just download templates. They're just shared as Google slideshow templates. And then you can just file, make a copy, and you have these great, beautiful, amazing blank slides to use for presentations. So Slides Carnival is a great site to check out if you're doing a lot of slideshows. That's kind of all I have. So it was quick, and I'm gonna email it out, but I'm also going to, I think I'm going to, oops, check the allow you to unmute. You can, and if any, I'm gonna email out that slideshow so you have it. I recorded, so you could watch this again later. And I'll post it to the website. I'm not sure exactly where, maybe best practices or something. Seems like maybe an appropriate place for it. And if anyone, has stuff to chime in and talk about, or wants to, kind of process any of that a little bit more, I think I'll stop the recording. Bye.